to begin with, and then we'll open it up for a general discussion. Well, you may not know exactly what the agenda that we have, so I will begin essentially with a presentation followed by Tim, and we have two other people who are actually helping us conduct this session, Ruchi and Clay. Along with Tim, they will make some other presentations so that we get a broad overview of what we are trying to do in this particular area of ethics, in the area of complying with ethics of biology, ethics of population research, ethics of genomics research. And also one of the basic tenets of HCA is to be able to generate data in our own labs, but share it globally. So, and that data sharing also comes with some ethical issues, and we will discuss all of that. So the whole idea is to get more and more people engaged with the Human Cell Atlas, the Asian component of the Human Cell Atlas, and to be able to, not only just join, but also make a commitment that they will share data following their own national policies and guidelines. We do not know all of the national policies and guidelines, so we will just probably make just a broad overview of what's going on, and then we expect during the discussion to learn more about national policies and guidelines so that they can be weaved in the general framework as well. So this is what our contention is, or this is what our plan is. So I will begin this session by presenting an overview of Human Cell Atlas. The Asian component is being discussed, and there are leaders of the Asian components who has discussed these in great detail. So I won't spend too much time on that. I'll spend a little bit of time on ethics, equity, and then go on and open it up for a more general discussion. I'll list a series of questions that we wish to discuss, but the discussion won't happen until Tim and others have made their presentation. So we'll leave the discussions towards the end. Okay, so let me share my screen and is my screen visible?
No, not yet.
Not yet, Tim?
Not yet. Not yet. We'll keep our eyes open.
I've shared my screen, and it shows a red button says stop share. So evidently it's sharing, but somehow something is not happening.
Yeah, no. What's going on now? Oh.
Do you see at all any screen?
No, so far I see you. I'll keep looking across the different videos in case it pops up.
So it says that there is an account error. Sorry, we can't get to your account right now. To fix this, please sign in again.
Oh,
Should
goodness.
I do that?
Maybe so. Maybe we may want to grab someone who's a coordinator as well to pull them in here. You may not have the right privileges to present.
Yeah.
I think that if the coordinator allows everyone to share, allow the sharing of, then you can get access to sharing.
Yeah. So I can't do that myself. So the coordinator needs to do it.
We need a coordinator. The one who opened this Zoom.
Yes. Anyways, what I will do is I don't have too many graphics here. So I will just go ahead and make my presentation without the privilege of your being able to see the slides. It doesn't really matter. So I can narrate it. It's essentially my slides are a narrative. So I'm going to narrate what's the contents of my slide until the coordinator comes along and fixes this issue. I can't do it. The Human Cell Atlas has a mission. And the mission is that we want to create a comprehensive reference map of the types and properties of all human cells, which are the fundamental units of life, as a basis for understanding, diagnosing, monitoring, and treating health and disease. So essentially, this is the mission of the Human Cell Atlas, and all of these sub projects that are emanating, that are being formed, such as the HCA Asia project, will all of these projects will funnel into this particular mission. So we do want to understand human physiology and to be able to create a reference map of all types and all types of cells and the properties of these cells under different conditions. So this is what the mission of the Human Cell Atlas is. There is a white paper that was published 3 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, in eLife called the Human Cell Atlas. And if you go to eLife and look for the Human Cell Atlas, it's a very long paper, which is really the white paper that comprises all of the various facets of Human Cell Atlas, including ethics and data sharing. So one can get a broad overview of what this Human Cell Atlas project is all about, and what are the different components that we need to pay attention to, not just from scientific points of view, but also from social points of view, ethical points of view, and sharing points of view. So that is the big white paper that was written even before the project was, well, it was launched, but it was had taken off, accelerated, so to say. The Human Cell Atlas is like the Google Maps for human body. It's not only a flat surface, but it's a three-dimensional surface, and therefore we wish to reconstruct the three-dimensional surface to be able to figure out what the components of the cells are at different points of time in the body, or at different in different organs of the body, which are three-dimensional in nature. Which genes are expressed at what time? Which genes are expressed in which part of the liver versus another part of the liver, and so on and so forth. And this is being done using mainly transcriptomics at this point of time, because that's been standardized in the lab, and many of us are able to do that in the lab, transcriptomics. But and this is being done at a single cell level, and it also, there's a whole body of technology that's come about to be able to do spatial transcriptomics, which essentially means that the same cell type in two different sites of the same organ may not be expressing the same genes, and we need to figure out spatial organization of gene expression. So this is essentially what the
Hey everybody, it looks like we're gonna wait just a moment. Looks like Partha might need to connect back for a moment. So let's just see if it just takes him a moment to get back. If not, we'll keep moving forward and we'll come back to Partha's conversation. While this is happening, I just want to remind everybody that this is being broadcasted and it's being recorded, and it will be posted on the HCA's YouTube channel and the Bilibili site. So just keep that in mind as well. While we're doing this, just for efficiency's sake, I would like to take a moment to introduce some of the team that I brought with me today. I'm on the data coordination platform, which is the data center that's a part of the HCA. I'm sort of a bureaucrat that gives presentations and doesn't do a lot of work. The real people that do work are Ruchi and Clay here. They're team leads, and they lead a lot of great work that we do in building. And so, like, just to take a moment while Partha's coming back online to for them to introduce themselves in their own words. Maybe Ruchi.
Hi everybody, I'm Ruchi. So I've joined the data coordination platform very recently. So probably over the past year, I've gotten a chance to learn a little bit more about the HCA. And my team specifically builds out almost like the data storage component we use for the HCA platform. And so my focus is really about making sure that the data access and sort of like data schema and data management needs for the HCA are appropriately covered with like the software stack we're building out. So that's sort of like my primary thinking here, and a lot of the a lot of my topics today that I'd love to discuss are like, what are sort of the compliance needs and how do we sort of make sure we fit that into our development and planning for data storage?
Thank you, Ruchi. Clay.
Hi, my name is Clay Fischer. I work at UC Santa Cruz in California. Our group is tasked with brokering in data to the Human Coll Atlas. So we are kind of the face of the HCA to a lot of data generating labs. So if you do have data sets, we'd be interested to know what they are, what you're investigating. We're also interested in knowing consent constraints. Data privacy has become a very big concern very quickly, and there's a lot of different methods to basically legislating data privacy. And it's important to us to make sure that we can represent all the appropriate data out there in the world. And part of that is collecting needs of what is preventing you from bringing data in the Human Coll Atlas if you have it, but cannot submit it. So later on in the breakout session, we'll be discussing this, and we'll have an email address so you can contact us and let us know if there's a way that we could work with you to ensure that your data makes it into the HCA and is represented.
Thank you, Clay. And as well, we're just really excited to be here and be a part of this meeting. HCA Asia is doing amazing science. We're here to learn, we're here to talk with you and get feedback from you. And so just we're here with open minds to hear from this group. So give Partha just another moment. If not, I'll just go ahead and try to present and get that part taken care of so that we can get to discussions as Partha comes back in, if that's okay. Just give him one more moment. All right. I think just for the efficiency of time, I'll go ahead and do the second presentation. We intended to have Partha's presentation, a little bit of discussion, and then about HCA Asia as a whole and working together in projects that might be of interest and going into the data coordination platform. But there's no reason for us not to start there and do the reverse. So let me go ahead and see if I can present and see how that works from here.
Let's see, close. Okay.
It seems to be working.
Thank you. All right. So I hope this will be, I'll try to go through this quickly. We're hoping to this be about 10 minutes, but I'll do my best here. Today I'm here to talk a little bit about the data coordination platform for the HCA. And just giving an overview of what it is. If you haven't heard of it before, I'm hoping to answer that question and why it exists. And then set up the stage for conversations to get feedback, because that is the most important thing here, is to hear us to hear about your feedback. So to give a little bit of a motivation first, the HCA, it's an amazing community. It's massive, right? And it's profiling millions of diverse human cells. There's hundreds of labs involved all throughout the world. You're thinking about lots of different tissue types, very organ-specific data, but a diversity of them. So diversity of people and as well as tissues involved, and many types of experimental techniques and data types. So it's important that we can come together and work on this very complex thing that we're trying to build together. And when you're thinking about who might want to use this data, there's lots of different kinds of people that might want to use it. And this isn't all of them, this is just some of them. So one can imagine, for instance, that experimental researchers, so these would maybe people who are generating data, sequencing data, contributing that data to the HCA. They want to be able to find and visualize that data after they've done that, for instance. You might also have computational biologists who maybe they're analyzing data, maybe they're making new tools for everyone as far as methodologies. Maybe they're comparing between data sets that are uploaded from different labs, right? Maybe they're doing a whole organ atlas, for instance. And then we could have software engineers. These software engineers may be interested, for instance, in downloading the data in bulk and creating software applications that make your life better and easier and enable science. This is only some of the people that might want to work in this space, and all these are very important as well as others. So trying to think through how can we make sure that this very big thing with all this data, like how do we center ourselves to make sure that people can use it? And we know there's a couple things that are important to us. At least we think, you tell us. But one of them is, for instance, it's comprehensive. We want this to be a resource, for instance, that has many kinds of data types describes humans, because that is what's happening in the Human Cell Atlas project. Additionally, it's important that this is inclusive. And so what I mean by that is inclusive not only with tissues, all sorts of different tissues, but also ensure all sorts of researchers can contribute and access the data, right? Inclusive in a lot of ways. It's important this is organized, and making it centralized, it makes it so that we can standardize it and harmonize it so that it could be even though it's generated by many different places, it can be used together. Accessibility is extremely important. We know the whole point of this is for us to work together, and so the data has to be able to be findable and accessible in a consistent way, not go to one place, download the data, have to format it, go to another place, download the data, format another way. We've all done that song and dance. As well, this is going to be a dynamic resource. It's going to be living and growing with new data types and techniques and analysis methodology, just as HCA is, just as dynamic. So this gives us a sense of sort of we have a sense of like, what is this platform, as sort of, what does it need to accomplish, but what will it be, right? And how does this drive that design? And so we know, for instance, that, building a meaningful atlas requires us to share and access each other's data. And so you have consortia data being brought to a data repository. And this is important because it's going to allow us to harmonize data so that they can be described with standard metadata, for instance, so that you can use it. The whole point is you can use it and it not be a painful process. So also, as well as a part of the vision for this, the analyses that you do are very important to us, and we want to make sure that we are thinking through ways that we can make sure that those things are available to people. But also sometimes there are opportunities for core analyses to be standardized and also additionally ran and given beside other analyses, right? And so we do have some methodology some pipelines that we can run to do core things that are reasonably accepted within the community, and also make that data available, as well as data that's contributed. So once we can imagine, once we have those contributed data in this, and also a standardized data, maybe it's useful for joint analysis between different labs, for instance. You have this really dynamic resource, for instance, that's always data is being added to it and it's updating. And it's important that we have a really stable way of being able to look and find the data, see what it looks like, be able to refer to it to others. You can imagine that having this dynamic resource without having regular releases, it would be difficult to actually level set and know where to work together in a certain space. So this is going to be an important thing to accelerate the science. But not only is the acceleration, the access important as well, it's important that we think about your day-to-day life. And so with this kind of system, it's also important that there are hooks there. There are ways that, the tools that you use that can leverage these things. If you want to use it with Scampi or Seurat, or if you have a favorite portal, that we make the data available, and we have APIs and such where they can work with it. We want to be a part of your everyday life. To make all that happen, to make it so that you can understand and find the right data, so that you can analyze and process the data as you would like to in doing your data analysis, and so that software can access the data as well in a uniform and consistent way, standards must be there so that we're all speaking the same thing and referring to the same thing. And so standards are also a really important part of the vision for this. And so now that I've spoken a little bit about what the platform motivates the platform and what it should do, then fundamentally that is the platform. So that is the data coordination platform. It's led by a team of engineers, biologists, and data wranglers. It leverages global standards and is proudly a part of the GA4GH community using many, many standards from this space. And it's the space that one can contribute data, ideas, tools, and such too. I've given you a sense of the DCP, and I just want to very quickly give you a sense of sort of the data flow. What does it feel like to be a part of this thing, right? And so you can imagine the general flow being data contribute single cell, people contribute single cell data to the system. When it makes sense that we also run standardized pipelines to create additional information for people if it's useful to use. And then you can access a portal, centralized space, for instance. And then I'm going to move us a little bit. Here we go. And researchers then can find the community and use these things in the way that makes sense to you. And so just to walk very quickly through that data contribution, how that feels like. And today, for instance, we have one of our data wrangling team leads here, Clay, who knows this much better than I, but to give a high level, data is contributed by different groups. As that's happened, there's a lot of things that go in that process. You can imagine that they ask questions about the suitability of the data for Atlas building. This isn't something that the DCP makes standards around. We have a lot of policies from the HCA as a whole that we learn from and implement. It's important to ask, does this meet the legal requirements of what we can hold in our system? Currently, right now, we have an open access system. We're moving forward in other spaces. I'll talk a little bit further about that in a moment. And then, to be able to collaborate and use this data, our wrangling teams will work with the people ingesting data to make sure that they're using that level of metadata and controlled vocabulary, and it's curated so that it's usable for the system. Then we upload it and validate it, and then make that data available. Whether or not we additionally process, we make the data available, and it may or may not have additional processing as well, but the originals are there too. So for our data processing, we do have a core set of pipelines that we are slowly expanding to do things that make sense for maybe joint analyses and are reasonably agreed upon things to do. That being said, it's all approved by our analysis working group. They're in charge there. These are cloud native public version documented pipelines that are currently available, and you could use them if you want. They're not locked in anywhere. We use a G4GH standard language called WDL to write them. And you can imagine they do things like producing alignments, G matrices, quality control metrics, things that would help you in your everyday life to use the data. How does it look like to access the data? Well, on the right is a picture of our HCA data portal, but the link below, you can go there, it's live, you can look at it now. It's a space where you can do faceted search to be able to search for data based on the metadata that you're providing and that we're standardizing. You can download the data locally, or you can move it to cloud-based environments to do the processing. And of course, you have a portal, other tools. We heard about cell by genes earlier. We have ways of connecting to those views if you have them available. And so that's just a shout out here that, we're excited about community tools that would like to connect to the system and be able to show views. We've worked with single cell expression atlas, UCSC cell browser, single cell portal, cell by G, many more. Please put your name here too. We'd love to work with you. If you have a view of the data that you're submitting, please let us know as you're doing it. Exciting things coming soon. So the data the analysis that you do it's so important. It's curated. It's your vision of what your question you were asking. Now people may ask other questions with the data too, and so some standard processing may additionally be helpful. But your own view of the data is so important, and so we're thinking of ways of how to make sure those are shared and available alongside other data from the DCP. And so that's coming soon. You'll see more about that, and it just really complements, I think, everything else that we're doing. Another thing that we would like to talk to you today about is the managed access. I think it's really important, very important to the HCA Asia community. At least that's the feedback we got last year. And so we're coming back saying this year, there's a pilot starting. And so we will be building out infrastructure for that. We've been positioning the infrastructure to do this for a little bit of time now. And we've brought a couple experts about that today so that we can hear about you, because we really want you to be a part of this. To give a quick sense about managed access, and what am I talking about here, is some data is open access. So it doesn't really require you to say what you're doing with the data or who you are. It's just available for you to use. Examples could be for like mouse data or like model species. Also, some of the ENCODE and 1,000 genomes, for instance, can be accessed this way. A lot of other data, however, is managed in controlled access, which means that you need to be able to apply to gain access, and you have to use the data in ways that make sense to the consents, right? And so this is a space that we're now thinking about. And so this often includes like human research, genotypic or phenotypic data. Here's some examples here, but I'm sure everyone here in this community is aware of this kind of data, because it's we've gotten a lot of feedback that's important to this group. So how can we approach this? We're thinking through it, but we have some tools in our belt. And a couple of the tools that we're aware of, for instance, is something called DUOS and DACs. DUO is a data use ontology, which is a GA4GH standard of how to describe data with a standard language or ontology. DUOS is a system that leverages it to make your life easier, to get access faster. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And DACs are a committee of people that make sure this is all happening correctly. And that would be something that would sort of be at the layer of access to make sure we're giving the data access correctly to people. To dive in slightly into that a little more, you can imagine on the left, for instance, you have data deposition from amazing scientists making data. On the right, we have people who are doing data access requests, amazing analysts that want to work with the data. In the middle of that is a data access committee, or people that make sure that the data is being given to people because they're doing the right thing with the data, right? They're following the consent. DUOS is a system, is an algorithm actually. It's an AI that allows us to use DUO, or the data use ontologies, describing how the data should be used, right? And it allows us to assist the DAC and be able to make life easier and faster and say, yeah, this makes sense, approve DAC, but still the humans, of course, approve or not. It allows it to be faster, more efficient, and consistent on the kinds of answers the DAC and the access they're given. We can talk a little bit more about that. Ruchi's our expert here today. So it's exciting to talk about that we have an upcoming pilot here, and we're thinking really deeply about a couple of spaces. GDPR is on our mind, consent tied to disease research, specifically general resource use, pediatric research. There's other use cases too. These are top of mind right now. We'd love to talk to you about what's on top of mind to you. And we're really, 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 really interested in HCA Asia members being a part of this. You as researchers and your data as well, to being a part of this, to make sure that we're thinking about you. Here's a email as well that you can always reach out to. And Clay here is the lead of this team here for you. And he's here personally to talk to you about that. So let's build together. This is a platform that's supposed to enable all of us to be able to do research faster and better and bigger and global. But we have to build together to do that. So please contact us, submit your data, to discover data, to ask questions, join the pilot. Really, we're a team here. As far as, there's a lot of people contributing to the data coordination platform and then the spaces around it. We'd like to highlight today the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. They're not only funders, but great partners in this. And also other teams building the DCP include the Broad Institute, UC Santa Cruz, and MBEI. This is some of our DCP team. I guess this is how we do it nowadays. Just smiling and saying hello. I'm going to acknowledge all their hard work. And thank you so much for our sister initiatives. Together, we're building something amazing. And thank you so much for our funders, because without that, this just doesn't happen. So I hope that gave you a little bit of a sense of the DCP, the data coordination platform, and set us up for some great conversations around how we can leverage it for this group or leverage the pilot for this group. And before we go forward, just want to confirm if we have...
Tim, I'm here. I don't know if I can still share my screen. When you were giving your talk, I received a message that I've been upgraded to a panelist,
Great.
Which is the reason probably why I wasn't able to show my screen. So maybe I will finish my slides, even though it's like, going a step back, and then hand it over to Ruchi. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, we just wanted to, we went ahead and just did that presentation while everything was being straightened out. And then if you want to do your presentation, we can just go through the questions that we had. I think it still makes sense. So just from that we've planned already. So go for it, Partha.
Right. Let me try sharing my screen here. Is anybody able to see?
Hey, it's working.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. You're not in presenter mode though.
Yeah.
There you are. Perfect.
All right. So that's good. So the reason why I wasn't able to show my slides is just because I was not a panelist. So thank you very much. So it's like taking a step back. I'm not going to retrace my slides. So this is where I was. Why do we need a human cell atlas? And I've mentioned that a little bit. We need to understand how organs generate and regenerate. We need to understand disease mechanisms that affect various organs of the body. Everybody doesn't respond to the same set of drugs, and so what are the variants that are involved in responses to drugs, and so on and so forth. So there are a variety of questions that we can answer if we understand the cellular composition of these organs and the different states that they are in, including the space, including the region where they are, region of the organ where they are located. So this is what we really intend to do in the Human Cell Atlas. Like Tim pointed out, that there are many labs in the world that have already joined. The HCA membership has become global and is rapidly growing, and there are many active participating labs in many parts of the world. These numbers are kind of dated, and the numbers have grown, as a matter of fact. There are major technological advances that are taking place both in the lab as also in the computational space. And Tim was talking about data sharing, and I think Ruchi will give us a little bit more insight about the technologies of accessing data and analyzing data. But essentially what we started with when single-cell genomics, the whole concept or the thought started, we were doing bulk genomics. We were isolating DNA or RNA from a whole bulk of cells and analyzing that together. Today we are able to do it at a single cell level, and we are also not only able to do it at a single cell level, we are also able to position the single cell in the three-dimensional space of the organ. So that's spatial transcriptomics, which is also happening. So the same cell type may not be in the same cell state in different spatial components of the organ, and that's important to know as well. So there are major technological advances that are happening that's enabling all of these questions to be answered. There's obviously, as the technology is advanced, there is a rapidly expanding toolbox for spatial analysis as well. And I'm not going to go through this. As we engage with HCA, we will get these toolbox. We'll get to learn of these toolboxes, and most of these toolboxes are shared among the community. The HCA is founded on the principle of sharing, and the sharing comes from with respect to sharing of technologies, with respect to sharing of principles, data, and so on and so forth. Of course, we share our protocols, and again, these are dated numbers. There are lots of people who are contributing to protocols. Tim pointed out where some people are actually contributing to protocols of data analysis, data access, etc. And therefore, these protocols are growing. There are many people who are contributing, and there is, of course, some amount of curation of all of these protocols that's also happening. Otherwise, people may not be using the most efficient way to develop a protocol. There are many atlases that have already happened, meaning organ atlases that have already happened, but these are being refined as well, liver, kidney, lung, and so on and so forth. This is, papers are coming out, manuscripts are being submitted almost every day, almost on a daily basis. The number of cells that have been, that are being, understood in a particular organ, both in the context of the numbers as also in the context of their spatial organization, is of course increasing. Also increasing is the number of individuals from which these cells are being harvested or are being sampled, because of course there is a lot of inter-individual variation as well. Just as there is variation in different components of an organ within an individual, similarly there is a lot of variation across individuals, and that needs to be taken into account. So the number of individuals is increasing, the number of cells per individual is increasing, and I think we are getting more and more robust views of how an organ develops and what happens if an organ is exposed to various kinds of environments. The Lung Cell Atlas has been published some time back, and as you can see in this particular picture, there are various cell types and cell states. Cell states are not actually displayed here, but there are multiple cell types as one would expect. And based on these kinds of pictures, you can also figure out what is the most dominant cell type in that particular organ. Similarly, if a disease sets in, does a minor subpopulation grow to become a major subpopulation, then you need to target that minor subpopulation early on, such that disease onset does not. So all of these things need to be understood in order for us to be able to control our health and disease, and that's eventually what the goal of this understanding is. There are, of course, many ethical issues that we face as we generate these data, as we engage in these kinds of science. Many of these ethical issues are standard. For example, we are trying to harvest cells from an organ and we need informed consent. So informed consent is kind of standard. There is also in HCA particularly, there is a dependence on accident victims, cadavers, etc. And the reason for this is that we need to harvest the cells as quickly as possible and analyze those. So, and some of these organs, are not easily accessible. So there is some amount of dependence on accident victims, cadavers, etc. That brings in newer ethical issues because the person from whom we are going to harvest the cells or the organ cannot give the consent, and therefore we need to think about other ways of consenting and obtaining consent. So those are newer issues that HCA is facing. Material transfer and data transfer, there are extra restrictions. There are national restrictions on use of research materials and transfer of research materials, and we need to discuss this because HCA is a global partnership, is a global project. There are also issues of intellectual property that come in the way because different nations have different kinds of intellectual property schemes and there is no common thread, but we need to think about the lowest common denominator and proceed from there, because otherwise such global projects cannot prosper or cannot go forward. We'll get stuck with lots of argumentation about who owns the intellectual property and so on. So we need to work from a lowest common denominator and move up. There are issues of confidentiality in the sense that even after we have generated data, can you share data freely? And different countries have different kinds of data sharing protocols or data sharing guidelines. So and there are confidentiality issues, particularly with respect to the donor, the person who has actually given you these cells or given us these cells to generate the data. So these kinds of issues need to be addressed. They are being addressed. Some countries have a moratorium in the sense that this happens especially in countries that do not have sufficient resources to be able to generate and analyze data in real time, and therefore they need to first generate the data, take stock of what's available in terms of resources to be able to analyze the data, and therefore they need some amount of time to be able to do even the first analysis. So there is a concept of moratorium where only a few people get access to that data and it's not globally shared right from the beginning. These are issues that are also being discussed in the organizing committee of the HCA, and these are issues that we do not want to come in the way of data sharing. So we need to discuss early on and learn early on what the aspirations are. HCA is, and we are talking about not only ethics, but we're also talking about equity. And HCA is anchored on egalitarian and comprehensive principles. So it's an inclusive project. It includes genders, ages, ethnicities, geographies, and people at different levels of socioeconomic status. And the goal is to be able to prepare a cellular atlas that's representative of humanity and therefore should be inclusive. It's organizationally inclusive as well. It spans countries, it spans levels of education, trainings of researchers, and it's all not in the same, not everybody is on the same page. So we need to be inclusive and to be able to help each other or help one another to be able to come to the same page or come to the same level. So we need to identify and overcome, first identify and then overcome these potential regional barriers to engagement in HCA, and the greater the engagement, the greater will be the probability of success. So we need to, that's a major goal. It's educationally inclusive in the sense that it should touch all sectors of society. Everybody should be able to understand why this global project been launched. Why should this global project be supported? And therefore, we need to be able to reach out to different levels of society right from the beginning. And there is a equity working group that's working towards, enabling all of this. There are 3 people in the working group, Musa Malanga, Alex Shalak, and myself. The 3 of us are trying to enable all of these equity. These are the principles, but we're trying to see how best we can implement these principles. We have a draft definition of equity. I'm not going to go through this, but we actually have written a paper, a commentary that has just been published on the 7th of October in Nature Medicine. And this commentary essentially, Musa, Alex, and I, we've been talking. There have been road shows. We're talking to people in various countries, and we have learned a few lessons to promote equity. And these lessons, as we were talking to various kinds of people, they said, why don't you write up these lessons and share it more broadly? And this is exactly what we've done. We have taken the lessons that we have learned, we have summarized them, and we've published in Nature Medicine, which has to do with the Human Cell Atlas and equity. One of the major lessons that we have learned is keep your ears open. It's not saying much, but oftentimes we do not keep our mind and ears open, and therefore we do not promote equity, or that's a bottleneck to equity, promotion of equity. So if whoever is interested can take a look. It's a short 3-page commentary, but has many things. I'm not going to go through this right now because this is the set of kind of questions that we would like to ask at the end. But before that, I think Ruchi and Clay and Tim will make presentations more about the data sharing, etc. And then we'll come back after you hear them. We'll come back and figure out what may be the bottlenecks to sharing of data, what may be the bottlenecks to your joining HCA Asia, etc. I will make one last point. I talked about HCA, but I haven't actually talked about HCA Asia. HCA Asia conforms to all of these principles that I've enunciated. That's a part of HCA. That's a part of the ethos of HCA, and HCA Asia conforms to that. HCA Asia is HCA Asia because it involves Asian countries, and it has a flagship project, and the flagship project has to do with the immune development program of the human body. And we believe that the immune development program of the human body is very dependent on the environment where you are brought up, and therefore there is a great deal of environmental interaction with the immune development, the kind of pathogens that you are exposed to or that you encounter. And therefore we believe that, and Asia of course has, as all of us know, a lot of environmental variability, and therefore the leaders of the HCA Asia felt that immune diversity would be something that one needs to look at in Asia in the context of the environmental exposures and environmental diversity. So this is what Asia comprises. We conform to all of the principles of the mother project, the HCA Global, and we have undertaken a specific project that has to do with immune diversity and immune cell development in the context of various exposures, and that comprises HCA Asia. The appeal is for more and more Asian researchers, who are resident and are doing their work in various countries to come together and make HCA Asia more vibrant and more successful. Thank you very much. We'll come back with these questions later. So I'll hand it over to Tim. I think Ruchi is going to be our next presenter, but let me hand over to Tim for facilitating the next few presentations. Tim, all yours.
Thank you, Partha. We were able to get those presentations done, so no worries there. I think we can just move forward with your questions and such. And if there's any visuals, Ruchi or Clay, you need me to bring the slides back up at any time, just let me know. I'll be happy to do it. But I think we can just keep moving forward, Partha. Thank you so much.
Sure. So is Ruchi not making a presentation? So should we just go ahead with these questions?
Let's go ahead, yeah.
Exactly. You're good.
All right, so I'll but please do feel free. I know what you guys were going to talk about. As we discuss these questions, you would need to provide lots of inputs, sort of background inputs to these questions, so that we can meaningfully discuss these questions. So even if you're not making a presentation, Ruchi and Clay, please feel free to provide your views and provide the background information. Yeah, thank you very much. So the question that the HCA leadership is asking, we have this major focus. I've said major foci. There are some sub-projects within HCA Asia that are brewing, and these sub-projects have to do with certain kinds of diseases, especially cancers. We are involved in cancers. Sham Prabhakar is engaged with a Chinese group in understanding what happens to cell types and cell states in a specific kind of cancer. So there are other sub-foci that are happening, that are also developing within HCA Asia. But the broad focus is Immune Atlas in Asia. And given that that is the major focus of HCA Asia, I suppose many people have joined this particular breakout session. Is anyone interested in joining HCA Asia? And we would like to do this in two ways. One is you can introduce yourself and say that you're interested in joining HCA, and I would request you to also send an email message to either me or Sham Prabhakar or Jason or somebody in HCA Asia who will be able to take your, who will be able to interact with you later. So can we hear if there is anyone who is really interested in, not yet a part of HCA Asia, but is interested in joining HCA Asia?
Hi, I'm Hyunsook from Seoul National University. Do you hear me? Right.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Thank you for bringing out all these questions. I'm actually a cell biologist studying cancer, so it was only recently that I was very much involved in getting interested in HCA by recommendation from my colleague, my friend Woongyang Park. Right. Because of the COVID-19 studies, I've been leading a group of faculties in Seoul National University to kind of, share all the knowledge across the nation about not only on the science part, but from the society and everything, from the preventive measures to molecular biology and how we approach to overcome this pandemic. And what I have been, one of the problems that I found in Korea is that I think you'd be aware that Korea is in a very good control over this COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2. But on the other hand, one of the problems, small problems are there in collecting data and especially sharing in the international community, is that because of the high cautions on the privacy issues, that collecting the private data like medical data or the preventive measures data was not that easy. So we faced those problems, and after this several months of the experience, because I was leading the group, so I kind of talked with the congressman and also the government that we need to actually have the some sort of the data center in the country, so that we can kind of facilitate the data generation, standardize them, and able to share them. So that was the interest that I had, that I said that I could come in to join this session to discuss. I'd like to actually get more ideas from your experiences of how we would actually reconcile both the awareness of the private information issues, privacy protection, versus sharing is actually helping everybody else, not only just the science, but actually benefiting everybody. So how are you going to persuade the people, and how are you going to kind of amend any kind of barriers? So I'm joining this session because I'd like to hear more from you. Is this okay? I mean, like, I'm very much interested in joining HCA Asia, and I think my friend Woongyang has actually put my name into that. So Well, in response to Partha's question, yes, I am interested. But yes, I have to admit that there are some small problems in sharing all the data generated from Korea and just share everything internationally. We have to work out some things with the society and also the government. So this is just my frank opinion about that.
So I can share my experience. Like you said, that we also work on cancers, and we are right now working using single cell technologies. The one thing that we have learned is that people are aware of what one does in bulk sequencing. There is a general awareness, but when you try to explain about single cell sequencing, it just needs so much more time to be able to tell them why you're doing so. What we have realized is that our getting an informed consent, even from the donor, takes a lot of doing, in the sense that we have to invest that much more amount of time to be able to explain to them, answer their questions. So as we are understanding, we're also preparing frequently asked questions, answers to a set of frequently asked questions. But as you know, in a country
So this is a really great question, and I would encourage others. You know, what are your experiences with this? Have you, Partha, are you back? All right. As Partha is coming back, I think we have him now. So while Partha's coming back, is there anyone else that's seen this? What have you experienced as well, and how did you overcome these?
So Tim, I was asking you, maybe before you share experiences about this, I was asking you to just add a few sentences to let us know what DCP has been thinking about to protect privacy and confidentiality with respect to data sharing. So maybe the algorithm that you guys have developed in terms of protection of private and confidential information, that will be useful. But then we can open it up again.
Excuse me, I have one question. The general rule, for example, if I did a lot of work collecting some biopsy for cancer from hospital, so we have the procedure. So now I don't know. Can we sell this data to the public?
Can you sell the data to the public?
Yeah, of course. When we publish paper, we always send the paper, send the data to public. But in that data, we don't give any. Of course, we don't get any personal message. But we let's see. Actually, for the paper data submission, we don't give for each data what is from the sex, the age, this kind of thing. Right. We don't give too much detail. We give some message, but it's not so much detail when we submit a paper with the data.
Well, it just depends. It just depends on what you're submitting. If your paper if you've analyzed, using some ethnicities or something, then the editor of the journal will ask you, where is the information in your data sheet on ethnicity? So you can't write a paper, analyze your data using certain kinds of variables and suppress those variables and not put it up on the journal website. So that's oftentimes objected to, that you haven't actually shared all the data with other researchers or with other readers of the journal. So I think that's something that's given.
So you're right. I think in that sense, as long as we don't release the detailed personal message, that should be okay to be shared.
Yes. Tim, do you have any extra thoughts?
Yeah,
so just one second. Let me hear Tim. Yeah, Tim.
Just going to mention very quickly, metadata is a very complex space, and it actually, what's considered identifiable or not can change depending upon countries, right? So this is something that I think it's important for us to understand and explore as we're thinking about bringing data in from different countries, trying to understand these things. And so it's great to see this. I think that what we can do, however, is Ruchi has some ideas around data sharing and how to make sure that that happens in a managed way. And maybe we can hear a little bit about that specifically. Metadata de-identification, it's really different per country. And we're here to learn about what are the constraints in your spaces for sure.
And I think in terms of like appropriate data sharing, I feel like Partha touched on this so well that it's really, in terms of making sure we're protecting the privacy of the people who are giving this data, it's really about making sure that we have the appropriate consent related to that individual's data, or if you're doing it as a part of that study, oftentimes an entire study comes with a consent form, and that brings a lot of clarity downstream for us in terms of data sharing about who can and can't see this data. So the more we can do upfront to get a sense for, this is the consent related to this individual, or this is the consent related to this study that includes a bunch of individuals who are participating. And it can be hard actually to understand when you start looking at, oh, so what does the consent form look like? And you start looking at the details, it can be complicated because in some ways it's almost like a regulatory document. So it can be hard if you don't have a consent form to just sort of write one up, because unless you're a lawyer, it can be a hard thing to do. But the nice thing is that because we've had experience working with the Duo system, we've had some experience writing out consent forms depending on what you're trying to do in your study and helping formulate that. So if you're ever finding yourself feeling like, oh, well, okay, so if my barrier is trying to understand what's going to be the consent and how I share data, but I don't have a consent form, that should not stop you from participating, but because we can help you pull these consent forms together like we have for other studies in the past. So we would love to sort of like help people, give people examples, sort of share this information as much as possible. The other thing that I think has become up and coming is this notion of we want to make sure that, given that different countries have different regulations around how and where that data can be stored, it is so important to make sure that once that data is appropriately consented and we're sort of standardizing it, harmonizing it, storing it in one location, it feels like, well, if you're putting all this data in one location, then like you're moving data around geographic boundaries, and that's not something everyone is comfortable with, which makes perfect sense. But the important thing here is that we're logically handling all of this data management through one service, but we have ways to make sure that genomic data from different countries can stay within infrastructure in that very country. So the beauty of being able to leverage cloud infrastructure for this kind of data is that we can take data coming from different sources and make sure that it stays within like the cloud geographic boundaries of that country. So I think that's another really key piece for a lot of different data set owners that we've talked to. And it makes perfect sense. And I feel like this is going to be a trend for the future, is making sure we can accommodate storage in different geographic locations in order to give people the appropriate amount of comfort and the right kind of flexibility to be able to follow their nation's regulation in terms of appropriate data storage. And not to mention, I think it's all about, and what we also want to do is make sure that, you know, when you submit your data, when HCA sort of, right now it's very open access data, but what we want to do is move towards a model where if you're putting in data that you don't want to share openly, and it's a little more, it's controlled access, what we want to do is build an infrastructure where you can keep that data private, and as people request access to data, there's sort of a vetting system that goes into place to make sure that that data is being appropriately shared depending on the rules and regulations. So there's definitely going to be a control plane in place to protect managed access data, whatever data has more sensitivities around it. So I think this could also be a great forum, and maybe other questions on Partha's slides were really also around like, are there sort of special needs or compliance hurdles beyond maybe some of the things we've talked about today that are on your mind and you'd want to sort of clear and see how other people are solving these problems as well?
Excellent, Ruchi. That was really nice that you brought in a lot of new things, and also it relates to some of the questions. So, for example, there are countries where they do not want the data to go out of their national boundaries. So you don't send all the data to Broad Institute for them to host on a server. So what Ruchi pointed out is that now we don't need to do that, provided that we are using the cloud system. That data, that set of data can remain within your national boundaries, yet other people can access the data. So the data is actually not going out. Some countries are very cagey that at some point of time they might actually block the data. So this particular technology and the both in terms of hardware and software allows one to keep the data within the national boundaries and yet share it with other researchers. She also mentioned about managed access and open access versus managed access. There are protocols where all the data are under managed access, which essentially in its simplest form, you send a request that you want to access this data, and there will be an approval, there will be a code that will be sent to you, and then you can actually access that data. Now, people like Ruchi and Tim, they are able to even allow us to access of the data completely open and some portions of the data that are managed access. So when we were talking about some of these, more sensitive kinds of data, there will be variables where if you really wanted access to those data, you then send a request. If you didn't want access to those fields of the data, then it's complete. So there are various kinds of very interesting, as questions are happening, as questions are coming up, as people are thinking through these things, very interesting developments are happening both in hardware and in software. And people like Ruchi are leaders in that game. We should ask the questions where we have hesitation, and they will be able to overcome the hesitation and provide a technology or a platform by which we can address that hesitation. So it is for us in Asia to be able to, if we are hesitant, if our country is hesitant, we should just bring them to the fore such that solutions can be found.
And I think that it's
I have one. Sorry, who's speaking?
Yes, Dr. Power, go ahead.
Yes, I have one sort of agenda for discussion. So just to briefly introduce myself, I did a postdoc in Sengwon Institute inside Taikonos group. So I have experience of submitting data to HCA DCP. And also I recently moved back to South Korea, and I'm now here seeking for opportunity to join the HCA Asia and also build a pipeline here to nicely coordinate data collection with the HCA. And in terms of the data submission, what I was wondering is what kind of format is the universally acceptable format that can be easily shared, easily uploaded, and also that is not missing any critical metadata. So for example, if we think about submitting like FASTQ files or raw sequence file as it is, I can see that there can be a lot of ethical problems and privacy problems. But if we just focus on the count matrices, then that's much less privacy problems are poses upon those kind of data. But at the same time, many people are submitting count metrics data these days with annotation, but in there, many of them are still missing the cell type annotation or very, very simple, and that is not this private, but also important information like gender or age or the source of organ like that. So I'm wondering whether HCA DCP has some consensus about having sort of dual layer system. One is something that is easily submittable and transferable because that has that lacks basically the privacy issue, but has all the metadata that is important for our basic need, and also having another layer of system that is sort of accepting diverse way of containing raw data and keeping the managed access. So that's my main question. So it's the question about formats, data formats.
So a couple of things here. Firstly, we do have standard formats for both metadata and data, and they're available on the website. And I will feel free to send that email to our help off of our website and directly ask this question so that we can point you to them. It may be interesting to, or the email that just went in the chat. it may be interesting to talk in a little more detail offline about the idea you have. But we do have standards currently that have some required metadata and additional metadata one could add. But I'd love to be able to connect you to maybe our metadata team so you can talk to them a little bit if you want to send us your contact for that. Also, I think it's important that some of the conversations that we're having, which is having, like we're thinking about like what is possible in technology, what can happen, and the pilot's a smaller thing and it's going to be really focused. And so it'd be really helpful here to sort of like zoom in on like what our needs and what are some needs we can hit right now and some needs that we might hit later on, just depending upon you know, what we hear from these groups. So.
Okay. Any further questions? Yes.
As I have a question. So I'm Nguyen from Australia, and my question is about new data type like spatial transcriptomics. So we have really huge tissue image data, like a gigabyte for each image. So do you already have a platform for this type of data to be deposited?
So imaging, so we've recently, for the most part, we've worked on molecular data sets and sequencing-based types of data sets. And so I'd just like to mention one thing, and then I maybe pass this to Clay to talk a little bit about where we're at with wrangling imaging. But I would like to mention that there's a group called the Space TX group, and they think a lot about spatial transcriptome or spatial assays and what are standards and file formats are a part of that. And so they may have some really good information about file formats for you. And I would imagine that that would strongly influence, or that'd be certainly one of the spaces that we think really heavily from when we're thinking about imaging and imaging data. And that's in the chat now, doing a great job. And then Clay, do you have any thoughts about wrangling imaging data?
Yeah, we've definitely been really interested in learning about all these different spatial techniques as they've been coming out. There's so many different modalities and so many great ideas. But as you noted, one of the problems is storage size. At one point, we were looking at just the egress fees from the cloud, downloading 10 pilot spatial transcriptomic data sets 10 times, and it was astronomical. So we kind of punted this over to the Space TX group to come up with these standards as Tim had suggested. And at some point, we will have to make the decision as to, do these type of data belong, the primary data there belong in the DCP, or would we want to, as Jong Park said, basically take the analysis only into the DCP? This is still open for debate, and we're really interested in hearing people's opinion. One challenge with bringing only the analysis in is we could lose some standardization, along with other things as well, but there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah, and another additional thing as well is there are some image archives like EBI, for instance. That could be a good home potentially as well as we're thinking through these things. So if you want to send your email to us, I can connect you to that archive as well. And they might be a good solution for you as we're thinking through this as a group. So
I think from the user point of view, many times I find myself writing to the authors to ask for high resolution images. And I totally understand why the authors cannot upload it to somewhere because the image is just too big. So it would be great if the DCP can consider that and make that possible for future users.
And is it the raw images that you're interested in, or maybe the stitched images? Like what are the kinds of images that you would be interested in having, and what to do like what's the general kind of thing you would do with it, so we can understand?
Yeah, so I'm developing some deep learning mechanisms that can look at the cell morphology. So that means we wanted to look at the detail of every pixel in that image, so as detailed as possible. And the higher the resolution is, the better that we can produce models for the different types of analysis. Usually the images that the authors upload to the to a repository would be like 30 megabytes is the maximum, or usually 2 megabytes. But what we're looking for is the like 1.2 gigabyte images that directly come out from the microscope.
Like raw from the microscope, or would a TIFF file work if it's uncompressed?
Yeah, so it's like, for example, the CGI form, the format, so the size image, and it can be opened in the company using the company proprietary software, and then exported to TIFF. So the TIFF then would be like few hundred megabytes, if not one or 2 gigabytes.
Okay.
Yeah. So do you have a plan on your pipeline, like to include some of that data in the DCP? Like, because we see the spatial types of research is emerging and growing very fast. And I think it's part of the Human Cell Atlas as well. So.
Yeah, there's currently right now, we see there's really an increase in adoption of imaging data and spatial data. And so it's something that's an active conversation with us. There's no interest in excluding that kind of data. We're just still trying to figure out what exactly would be the approach to it, I think, and understand when to prioritize it. But there's no, we don't currently, from my knowledge, ingest it today. There are some EBI archives one could leverage, I believe, for this, and have it safely placed there while we're going through this. But we are, thinking a little bit about this, and I'm sure more conversations will come up, in the future.
Thank you.
So can I shift gears a little and bring this discussion back a little bit towards ethics? It is a very, very interesting discussion is happening because these technologies are, there is demand of different kinds of data, and the technologies, some of them are available, some of them are upcoming. So it's very important for us to hear what the data demands are. But, Tim and I have also been told that we need to talk about ethics because there is a lot of, there are a lot of ethical issues concerning different Asian countries that are very specific. So does anyone want to actually speak to that? Are there specific ethics restrictions or ethical restrictions that are specific to your country? That would be very helpful for us to learn and then come to a lowest common denominator, so to say.
Especially any ethics that would involve constraints or hesitations for bringing your data into a system like this.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I can share a little bit of my experience in Korea. So according to all the laws in Korea, so people are very aware of, they have all the rights to protect all the privacy issues. So the culture in Korea is that sharing the biological data, including genomics or like the single cell analysis of the PBMCs, that is not much understood in the society, I think. So we are trying to kind of put forward with, kind of persuading and discuss with the public to kind of enhance the knowledge on what are the benefits of sharing the biological data. So those are the things that I'm trying to put forward. Well, I think that, we have a very good control over, protecting privacy, and also the ethics issues is very high, but that is actually too high that practically sometimes it's becoming a barrier. So that's what I recall from the experience I had with the COVID-19 PBMC studies in Korea. So, well, yeah, I don't know what other countries are having, but yeah, Korea is very, very good in protecting all these privacy issues, unlike what you think of, kind of having this trace information. We are having a very strict law about it.
So one of the things that this is just a comment, one of the things that we are doing in our ethics working group precisely this. We need to educate people, and we need to spend a lot of time to educate people, because if there is lack of education as to how these data are going to be usefully used or negatively used, then people are not sure, and then there is a pressure on the government will come up with draconian rules. That's happening in many countries, and this is really lack of information and the lack of education starting at the grassroots level. So one of the things that we are trying to do in the equity working group is to take school children, college children, and even tell them about what HCA is all about. That is very important, because then we believe that they will go and talk to their parents that, we learned this today, and the parents will get curious. And so that's what we are doing. It's going to be a long drawn affair, because this, looking at genomes or transcriptomes at the level of a single cell is something that, that I don't think biologists actually had conceived ever, but this is now doable. And so we think that it's a good thing to start early on, but then we also need a large cadre of people who understand these and can actually promote by talking to other people, talking to general citizens, and talking to younger people of various countries. So that's very important, we believe.
I have one more question. Well, to educate people and have the consent from the public, what is really important, I think, is that, to kind of tell them and, have the agreement that the personal data is well protected. And that is actually
Yes.
global standard. So it is very important that not only regional issues, but internationally, how they are protected. So based on that, the comment from Ruchi on how all the data are at the region in the cloud, but not shared, kind of flying around in the globe. It's not the case. So that is one thing important. But again, that I suggest that maybe HCA can bring up with kind of very simple guidelines of these are the things that we do. So globally and internationally, the privacy issues and the personal data are well protected. So sharing the information and sharing the biological data is actually really good for the public, not only yourself, but for the general. So I think those kind of words and maybe the messages should be spread around. So I asked maybe the organization to kind of maybe spread out simple kind of guidelines, and these are the things that we are doing internationally, not just the regional issue.
Many more foot to be able to do this.
I may have another question. It is possible for the DCP to work with some of the repositories centers that are specific for each country. Like, for example, in Australia, we have some organization that hosts genomics data. So if we submit the data to the Australian organization, and then the organization's linked to the DCP, would that be an option? Or?
So, when you say linked, what do you mean by that?
The data transfer can be from let's say, Australian organization to the DCP if there is a request for the data, but it's hosted by the Australian organization. Similar to the cloud idea, but in here there's already organizations that are assigned to do this kind of data hosting.
Right. So, and when you say that they're linked, does it mean there'd be a data transfer, or there would never be a data transfer there? Like, would there be an ingestion of DCP or not? I'm just getting a sense of the data flow here.
Yeah, I think there's so it's just my suggestion. Like, there may be a request from user to access to the data. So the DCP will still have the metadata for that. So the user know that they may need that data and they put in a request. And then the DCP work with the organizations in the country to get that data from that organization.
Yeah, so currently that kind of functionality doesn't exist, but is there, are there sort of legal constraints or like what drives that need? It'd be helpful for us to understand like what's the need around that.
So for the like ethics application document, we can specify where the data will be stored and shared. So it's can be easier to specify like a Australian organization to manage that data, and then DCP can work with that organization as a as a second step for the HCA community to access to the data.
I think that's an interesting idea, because I don't know if we've ever talked to like a secondary organization like this to see if we can like build some of these bridges. I think the challenge here is going to be that we do a lot of work behind the scenes in standardizing a lot of the data and a lot of data processing. So when we don't have a copy of that data, it becomes hard to treat all the data sort of like through the same level of processing and care. So I think we'd have to, I mean, I think it's an interesting suggestion. I haven't thought through what it means to have just metadata, not file data, and what are different ways to sort of connect into other organizations that already have this data that people are already comfortable with. So I think it would take a little more exploration, but I think it's a really, really interesting suggestion.
So you have less than 5 minutes left for this session, and we must end in time because it's all dovetailed, so we should end on time. Are there any new ideas, new questions that are coming up, either with respect to data sharing or with respect to ethics or with respect to ethics and data sharing?
Can I ask a question?
Mayumi, were you trying to ask something?
Yeah. Can I?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to make sure I understand correctly. So my question is, who can choose the access system, like managed access or the open access? Would it be the data subject, or the research team would decide which system would be adopted? So that's my question. And yeah, please.
So that, please correct me, Ruchi, if I'm wrong here, but most of those, at least the settings that I'm aware of, that decision is often based off of the consent associated with the data. So the person generating the data and depositing the data would make us aware of what the uses are for that. And that will define if it is controlled or managed or open or not. And Ruchi, do you?
I think it can also, a second factor that can be impactful here is that if a principal investigator has like an IRB protocol type form associated with a study, that can also have some built-in conditions around like how and who can share that data. I think all of my experience has shown that like it's really about that documentation, your protocols, how you're going to manage your study. Most of this information is written there. So in some ways, I feel like the PI is mostly sort of ahead of time deciding like, is this going to be, what am I trying to do with this data? Is it going to be managed access, open access? And then that decision is made pretty early on. And when you're at the point of depositing data, you have to make sure you just follow the decisions that have been made early on in like in putting that study together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
So can I add Mayumi, before you go, I want to add something, which is that in India, the national ethical guidelines will overrule everything. I mean, we can't, as personal independent researchers, we can't decide what we are going to, declared as managed access and what we are going to declare as open access. It's all under the framework of a national policy, provided that we have adopted the guidelines under that national policy. We are free to do it, but if we have not followed it, then we as independent individual researchers or individual PIs are not allowed to take decisions. It's all under a national framework. So independent PIs can take these decisions provided they have followed the guidelines under the national framework.
Yeah, thank you. Because I asked you because Japanese regulation does not precisely mention about the genome data could be open access. And as far as I know, there's no cases that adopted the open access system in Japanese genomic data research. So that's why I asked you. And I very appreciate the DCP that adopted the managed access system to be included in the HCA. Thank you.
And it's important to note that we haven't built the managed access system yet. We are building it. And so that's why we have a pilot. So because we want to work with you and have you a part of that. But hopefully it sounds like every country is different. That's why we're here. We're going to hear these stories. And Japanese
Yes.
regulation doesn't allow open access, but hopefully managed access will be able to do something with that. So.
Yeah, it will solve a lot of problem for us. Thank you.
Good.
I think we should end this session here because there's a dovetailing of various breakout sessions. Reporting session that starts at 12:30. So Tim, will you be there in the reporting session? Do you have the time?
Is that in 30 minutes?
No, that's in 3 hours.
I may not be able to be there at that time.
Okay.
It might be
All right.
past my
So I
bedtime.
was only informed yesterday, Tim, so I had no choice. I said yes. But I have actually a national meeting till 1 o'clock, but I'll try and excuse myself half an hour ahead of time. All right. So thank you very much. I think this was very useful. What I will do is to summarize all of the discussions that took place. Won't have the time to write it up, but in my verbal summary, and I'll make that, I'll present that in the reporting session of these various breakout sessions that will come together 3 hours from now. Thank you very much. It was extremely useful. Please join HCA Asia if you can. We'll overcome all of the bottlenecks, all of the hurdles, but it's important for us to come together in Asian countries and generate some common data sets and specific data sets. Thank you very much.